and welcome to the very first edition of the Pepper Podcast. Since you all are new here, the Pepper Podcast covers a wide range of spicy events that occur in our daily lives. Two high school students tackle heated topics through the discussion. I'm your host, Jay Mehta, and joining me is my co host, Andy Watanaskunpan. And today's topic will be covering the widely known yet misunderstood issue of climate change and its impacts. Today's society has increased the amount of awareness around climate change compared to previous generations. However, the threat still encompasses our society, and without proper conduct, the world will feel an impact that it cannot return from. It has been stated that even if we go carbon zero today, the effects would continue to haunt us for years, according to theconversation.com.
Together, we've gathered various aspects surrounding the threat of climate change, including hotter temperatures, more severe storms, etc. And we will be exploring those deeper today.
So, I mean, there's a lot of issues around surrounding our society and climate change. And at first, I think it's a good idea to talk about maybe future prevention and I guess how climate change has come about in our society. So, especially because of cheaper costs of coal and industrial societies have pushed um, on unsustainable fossil fuels into the
Yeah.
energy source,
hmm
and those have been the mainstream for many decades, even hundreds of years since the Industrial Revolution. And it's only recently, in this past decade and the previous decade, that we've really created alternatives. For one example, we
Yeah.
have Elon Musk's Tesla's electric cars. Those have become very popular nowadays. We're working towards um, other alternatives like biofuels and reusable energy, and like wind and using hydropower and things like that. Um,
Yeah, and I think it's really hard to come up with clear-cut future preventatives
yeah,
because there are so many aspects to, climate change. Because obviously, one argument could be made towards climate change and why we don't really need to worry about it is that climate change always happens, right?
yeah.
However, what we've seen in recent years, especially since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, we've seen human activity cause this exponential increase in the rate at which climate change is happening. And
hmm
this causes incredibly disastrous effects on
yeah.
ecosystems all across the world.
And climate
And
change, sorry to cut you off, but climate change is also categorized. It's not just climate change being the general threat of our society. Climate change is composed of a lot of various things, right? So, like global
yeah,
warming is one aspect of climate change, which I hear is a little bit misconstrued. I feel like because there's just this general idea of climate change and global warming being the same thing, in which there are similarities and there are constituents, but they there's a bit of a difference. Like global warming falls under the term of climate change, but there's a lot more that goes on to climate change than just global warming, and that's something we should
yeah.
definitely bring light to in our society.
Yeah, and I think so too. And a lot like from personal and anecdotal experiences, I think that what I like to discuss the issue of climate change because I'm a passionate advocate of environmental sustainability. I think that a lot of people are confused with what climate change is. Yes,
I
climate
agree.
change does exist. The climate definitely changes. It is flexible, right? But you can say that with global warming specifically, that causes more extreme events, more extreme
I agree.
winters and
hmm
snowstorms, more extreme hurricanes, tornadoes.
And we've
You
seen a
know, it's
lot of
not
it in the
just
past
one.
recent years, and even in the past recent 5 years, we've seen
Yeah,
tons of catastrophic events. We've even
yeah,
just this year and last year. I mean, it's the start of 2022 now, but last
hmm
year in 2021, there's been disastrous effects on our
yeah,
society with hurricanes and snowstorms, and it's been very difficult and I feel like it's been a bit of an awakening in our I guess in our society. It's really opened people's eyes, especially even in the Tennessee area. We've received a lot more tornadoes than normal. I don't really remember
yeah,
having a lot of tornadoes in my area when I grew up.
hmm
But now, I mean, we've had two in the past 2 years. Um, the last one was in 2020 that completely devastated my old middle school. And the recent one completely shred through Bowling Green, Kentucky, and its citizens. So
yeah,
I feel like it's a very controversial topic. But I feel like if we bring more light to the issue, and people understand more about it, I feel like it could be not solved, but there could be workarounds to it because it's very
I
difficult
completely
to I guess find a solution to a problem so big.
Yes, the global warming and the extreme heating of the earth due to human activity for the majority is a very multifaceted problem,
Mm.
and it does not have it doesn't necessarily have a direct solution. It takes the work of people all around the world with different systems being implemented and changes, because while yes, the majority of global warming and greenhouse gas emissions that trap the heat in the earth's atmosphere, that is caused mostly by corporations and big oil companies, coal mining,
Mm-hmm.
all these giant that have like huge amounts of CO2 and huge carbon footprints. While that does make up a huge part of the problem, people and their individual choices also make up a large part of the problem.
Yeah,
And I don't think that people realize, because it's like they
that's a
think
good
that
point that you brought up. Yeah,
yeah, they think that like there's changes that they can make, but what's the point of making them when there are these giant industries? But those are just oftentimes excuses, and that try to justify their own stubbornness to change for the better.
I agree. Definitely, it's something that people use. It's like, oh, if I'm the only person doing it, why should I be the only one doing it when there's so many other people
Hmm.
doing it? And I feel like that's such a horrible excuse, specifically
Yeah.
because in the aspect of something that's detrimental to our society, any help is help, right? Regardless of how big it is, it's something that prevents something worse from happening, right? Especially
Yes.
with like the introduction of, I mean, even back in the 1900s when we introduced like refrigerators with chlorofluorocarbons,
Yeah.
CFCs, they decimated our atmosphere. They decimated, um, well, our like ozone layer, which is
Yeah.
it was very risky and it was very dangerous,
Hmm.
and even the ozone layer is still repairing to this day, but it's still it's been rough. But with the protocols that have been put in place, the Montreal Protocol, things
Yeah.
have been um, semi. It's been stagnant specifically because I mean CFCs have been banned, but they've been replaced with but this goes back to what I'm saying of there's this perpetual kind of motion that keeps bringing um like I guess fossil fuels and global warming or I guess elements with GWP into our atmosphere because these like companies are instead of using CFCs use HCFCs,
Yeah.
in which the difference between them is chlorofluorocarbons destroy our ozone layer, in which HCFCs do not destroy our ozone layer, but in fact they just add to the climate change and global warming specifically because they add a lot of global warming potential into our atmosphere. They have a very high global warming potential, and it takes very long for them to go away, which is very destructive for the atmosphere. But thank God we're moving to other things now.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think the point that you brought up about like the ACFCs and that inverse uh, reaction to the CFCs destroying the ozone layer is something that I'd like to explore a little more. And it's like there are also things that cause global warming or hasten its process,
Yeah.
such that we don't necessarily take into consideration of our
Mm-hmm.
everyday lives,
Yeah.
such as like our food choices,
Yeah.
and
That's very important.
or something as random as like Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
Because to
Yeah.
mine that and get on that
Yes.
blockchain, it takes so much
Very
energy, so
energy
much
intensive,
process.
extremely energy intensive. I mean, there's been recent news articles about countries limiting the amount of Bitcoin that their
Mhm.
citizens can mine because it's so energy intensive.
Yeah,
And even though it's earning you money, I mean, what? This is a bit of an awakening, and I guess it's a little bit controversial. But what's really the value of money when there's nothing to spend it on? You know,
exactly. Yeah,
we're destroying our society for the value of money when in reality we're destroying our environment that provides the resources that we need that we pay for, you know? So we're
yeah,
destroying the things that we pay for by gaining money, you know what I mean? In order to gain
yeah,
money, we're destroying what we buy. And so we're just destroying the cycle and eventually there's going to be a moment where we're not able to come back. And I want to prevent that. And I guess it may not just be our generation. I feel like more generations are understanding this more, but
Hmm.
it's definitely something that has been widespread throughout. I know from my generation at least, or the people that I know, people are scared. Especially people are just really scared
Yeah.
about what's going to be like, what our future is going to be
Hmm.
like, because it's our world is going to change so much, specifically because we're not stopping really our carbon production. You know, we're releasing so much carbon dioxide, and we still are, even though there's so much talk of, oh, we're going, you know, we're going more carbon zero, we're going more carbon zero. I mean, India said that they would go carbon zero, net zero by 2080, I believe. I can research that,
Yeah.
or 2060. I can double check that again, but um it just shows that, like, but like, really, will how will they do it? Like, will they do it? And also I feel like, will they be able to make that in time where it makes enough of a change, or will 2080 be too far in which we can't really come back? There's no saving point. We're on the point behind saving, you know?
Yeah, and I think that it's 2070, which you're
Okay.
pretty close.
Yeah.
They said that they would go carbon zero by 2070, but I have my doubts. But like obviously, I think that a country making a step towards going carbon zero, especially a country as densely packed and populated as India, is a very responsible and
Mhm.
enlightened mindset. However, I saw some predictions of the population of India going to surpass that of the population of China to become
Mhm.
the most populous country in the world,
Mhm.
and I fear for that because like that's obviously an offset of the global warming because as temperatures rise and as weathers become more extreme, the Arctic ice will melt, and then that
Yeah.
in turn will make the sea oceans rise, forcing people to move inwards,
Mhm.
forcing incredibly stronger droughts that last
Mhm.
for way longer and make crops grow less.
Not to
But
mention, we're in a water shortage already. You know,
mhm,
there's so many people that do not have access to water in our
yes,
society, and even not even just like out of countries. You know, like, not even
yeah,
just in our third world countries. This happens in literally, like, the United States, like California, the southern part of California. There's an extreme water shortage, and there's a discrepancy between companies and conglomerates that are using this excessive amount of water, and its citizens that are unable to have just access to, to just get a drink in the morning, or just take a shower, even, or even flush their toilet.
yes, yes. And I think that like yes, food and water scarcity in the world is incredibly bad right now. But like imagine what it'd be 50, 100 years into the future when that commodity like water and food that
Hmm.
people need
Hmm.
is going to be so much more hard to achieve and so much more expensive to get,
Hmm. I agree.
you know?
I feel like we should
And
create
like
a mental awakening right now, and that's
mhm,
why it's
yes,
so important to create a mental awakening before we have a real, true, rude, like, physical awakening, in which we experience severe effects in our society, where there are people that are starving. I mean, we have people starving now, but there's going to be hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people, hundreds of millions of people that are starving,
yes,
and without access to clean water, and those are like necessary to survive. And if we don't stop and, like, look back, look at the big picture and see what are we really doing to our society, this, like, future generations are really going to suffer from like, what we're doing today.
yeah, no. And I know I read a an article that said like global losses from climate disasters in 2021 far exceeded $100 billion in
Oh my God.
just this last year. And just in the US,
Hmm.
2021 weather had cost the country $145 billion, which
Wow.
was the deadliest since 2011.
Wow.
And I think that yes, it is easy just to say like, yeah, that could have happened in any other year, even if
Hmm.
global warming was like not a thing or not as bad.
Hmm.
Yes, but we've seen this trend.
Yeah.
You know, hottest summer since whatever year, hottest summer consistently every single year, hottest month since
There's
whatever.
a 100% correlation between um the effects of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and just even elements with global warming potential, and their like an increase, like warming of
Mhm.
ice, and there's a definite correlation between them.
Yeah, and I think that like it's not just carbon dioxides that are greenhouse gases.
Yes, yeah.
Obviously, there's like like say for example, a lot of scientists like to point out the effect that the beef industry has.
Yeah.
So to get
I'm
beef,
glad we're
right?
here. I'm glad we're here. This is I have a lot of points on this part. But
Yeah,
before you
yeah,
start, I just want to delineate a few of the big um greenhouse gases. So number one, that's very less talked. It's a lot less talked about. Is just water vapor. I mean, water vapor is
mhm,
a um greenhouse gas. But it's
yeah,
just. I mean, it's not as bad. It doesn't have that bad of a global warming potential, but it
yeah,
is because it has there's copious amounts of it in the atmosphere. So
yeah,
but it's not as bad, generally, because it is more of a natural type of thing. And then we have
yeah,
our carbon dioxide. What's so important about carbon dioxide is that it's generally, a lot of the entry of it to the atmosphere is like anthropogenic, right? So it's
mhm,
the humans that are doing it mainly. And then we have methane. So methane has a higher global warming potential than carbon dioxide, but less time
yeah,
than carbon dioxide. But it has
yeah,
um, I guess it has a higher global warming potential, meaning it's more devastating for our atmosphere. However, it is shorter in time. But the effects of, as you're about to speak about how cows and how they produce a lot of methane have been perpetuating and have been like, they've been keeping the cycle going of adding methane into our atmosphere. And so I'll give it back to you. Just wanted a few add a few compounds.
yeah. And so I think that the point you brought up and the distinction that you made between methane and carbon dioxide, since they're the most like talked about uh, greenhouse gases, is methane's lifetime is around 12 years in the atmosphere.
Hmm.
And that while you say it is shorter than carbon dioxide, 12 years is a very long time, especially with increased production of methane released by global warming in and of itself, because it's like that cycle, right? Like
Hmm.
as the temperatures rise, methane is released from the Arctic that's trapped below the ice. And then there's also human activity, like the beef consumption, for example. And like just to get that beef, I know, especially in the Amazon rainforest, for example, they cut down trees
Yep.
and entire forests
Yep.
just to make
Clear.
beef
No,
farm.
not even just to mention. It is clear cut farming. They do not preserve
Yeah,
any biolife. They do not preserve any
yeah,
biodiversity. They clear cut. They clear cut to remove all types of biodiversity. So not only are they cutting um well, timber that they could sell, and they've been destroying the atmosphere. They're destroying carbon dioxide reducing organisms, but they're destroying biodiversity in the process. And so we're having an extreme loss of biodiversity. It used
yeah.
to be that two animals go extinct every I believe it's don't want to get my facts wrong. I'll research into that fact, but I'll come back to that.
Okay. Yeah. No, I was just gonna say that like they they cut down the areas with a bunch of trees. They preserve no biodiversity, displace indigenous populations, and this is because large companies are trying to incentivize countries like Bolivia, Guyana, Suriname, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Brazil to allow them to work in these areas and cut down with huge amounts of money because they know that the beef industry is incredibly popular. And so once you cut down all of that, you have destroyed the Amazon rainforest, which is a huge contributor of oxygen and absorber
Mm-hmm.
of the carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. And not to mention that the amount of methane and carbon dioxide that cows produce
Mm-hmm.
through like waste and just to get to feed those cows, to water those cows, to process those cows, it's
Mm-hmm.
incredibly detrimental um, to our ecosystems. And I'm not trying to advocate for veganism because I know that
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes veganism, which is a misconception, veganism is actually more harmful than buying local produce and uh, locally derived meats and animal products because you have to ship plant products from halfway across the world or from across the country, which the net carbon footprint of that already increases the uh, already surpasses that of just getting local produce and animal products. So I think that that's one thing that a lot of people fail to see. And obviously, just dietary restriction wise, if you want to do that, then go ahead, all the power to you. And I know that uh, in recent years, like 3 4 years ago, I decided to take the step towards vegetarianism,
Mm-hmm.
then more towards veganism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people are starting to realize that.
Yeah.
And I definitely support that,
Mhm.
but
I mean, I've been a vegetarian since birth, and I still am
mm,
vegetarian.
mhm,
I mean, I consume dairy, and that's it. I don't consume eggs, but or any fish, or but that's what vegetarian
yeah,
is.
yeah,
So I honestly am a little thankful. I guess now it's less of more I guess religion, and more of choice, and virtue. And it's that I'm really seeing an issue in our society, and I
yeah,
feel like I'm protecting um I guess the prevention, and I'm preventing, further destruction of our atmosphere. And going back to our loss of biodiversity, I was right. The extinction rate baseline is about one species per 1 million species per year. So one
hmm
species dies for every 1 million per year. The current rate is around 1,000 and 10,000 that times higher than the natural extinction rate, and we've had only like around 800 extinctions been documented in the past 400 years.
hmm
So that's about 2 per million, which is extremely bad.
yeah,
We've had hundreds of species, hundreds of biodiversity just lost. Just recently we've had the northern white rhino species completely go extinct, which is um saddening to hear. But yeah, it's just truly sad.
yeah. And it's it honestly is that it's like, since our culture has been so dependent
Hmm.
on consuming,
Yeah,
we've lost that touch with nature.
yeah.
I think that's environmental sustainability responsibility that we should all be
And
having.
especially it's actually funny that you mentioned that. Developing countries actually consume less meat than developed countries. So the developed countries consume a lot more meat than developing countries do, and that can be
Hmm
again through access to food and resources and things like that. But it's ironic that we have all of this information and technology that has warned us about the effects of climate change, yet we continue to, you know, put more put more meat on our plate and put more food on our plate, and continue to, throw food in the trash and things like that. We're wasting so much, and we're not only consuming so much, but we're wasting so much, and that waste has not been helping, because that waste have been
Yeah.
used, to support
hmm
other people with and preventing, like any kind of like starvation and things like that. We have a lot of people that are starving in our country. There's been a lot of food scarcity, even in our country. It's not just abroad. I mean, it's abroad as well, but it faces our country as well. And so it's something that definitely is it's honestly scary, because the more we have, like, the less we have access to food, our food scarcity is going to increase and increase and increase, and it's going to be very difficult because, I mean, you remember during when COVID first hit, and people like ravaged the stores. I mean, stores
Yeah.
were absolutely devoid of their toilet paper for some reason. But I mean,
Yeah.
grocery store aisles were clean. I mean, no milk, no bread. It was difficult, right? With
Yeah.
increasing gas prices and things like that, we're going in inflation, right? But and I guess that's a different topic for another time. But inflation has also perpetuated, and it's also shown that, like, the price of meat and the price of
hmm
um fish and things like that is so expensive now, yet people still choose to do it. I wonder,
Yeah.
even though that it's so expensive, why are we still continuing to do it when there's other alternatives? And I understand it's a matter of culture and things like that, but I feel like
hmm
there are kind of alternatives, right? We have vegan alternatives, and I know they don't taste the same from what I've heard, but there's
Yeah.
better environmental alternatives, um,
Yeah.
that can still give you that, you know, that kind of taste. Not exactly, but it can give you, a reminder. Um, but it's also just better for the environment.
Yeah, and I think that even like on the individual level, when you make little changes, like I'm gonna go meat free Monday,
Hmm.
like making those little changes, or I'm gonna cut out this, or I'll eat this less. That's an incredibly large step.
Uh-huh.
And while it may not seem so, it really does have a profound effect on our step collectively towards environmental sustainability.
Yep.
And I'd like to talk about like energy production, because
Hmm.
a lot of energy is produced by coal, by
Yeah.
oil,
Yeah.
by,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think that
Through
we're realizing,
unsustainable material. Yeah.
And by realizing, like what you said, unsustainable, the oils that we're using right now, the
Mm-hmm.
petroleum, whatever, it's all going to be incredibly expensive
Yeah.
because of scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a difference between scarcity and a shortage. A shortage is um, partial. It's like temporary scarcity in which it replenishes over time. But
Mm-hmm.
oil is not like that, since oil takes hundreds of thousands and millions of years
Yeah.
to develop. You
Our
know,
carbon our
and
carbon storage
once
will not be replenished for hundreds of
exactly,
thousands of years. So I mean,
exactly,
we're just destroying our resources when there's better alternatives out there. I just don't understand.
yeah, yeah, and like I understand like the efficiency
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
what that oil brings, but like it's in a few years, like 50, 100 years, the price of oil is going to go up to such an outrageous amount
It's
that
yeah, it's better for companies honestly, and I guess I'm not gonna exactly finish your thought, but it's honestly just better and cheaper for companies that are going to last these 50 100 years to just invest in non-renewable or
yes,
renewable resources.
yes,
It will literally save them not only money, it will not only save them time, but they might even get money from it from the government that are supporting laws, because they might even
yes,
be going over cap and trade policies. They might
yeah,
be going over their limit, and they may have
yeah,
like be having to pay if they just go, to renewable resources. That's not very difficult. I mean,
yeah,
it is an investment, but it will pay off. Then it's just
yeah,
better because it just saves headaches in the future. I just feel like companies aren't realizing that yet. And they're
yeah,
continuing to consume their oil, which is just going to
hmm
fall back on them later.
yeah. And I think that like there's arguments against what we should do about that, and I think that we need to try to convince governments to
Mm-hmm.
take that step and awareness and put that focus on the climate crisis, because that is arguably one of the most important things that we all as a human race are facing. Because I know that there's the Green New Deal,
Mm-hmm.
and then but like what really is that doing? Because like if we look
Yeah.
at like countries that are like, oh, net carbon
Mm-hmm.
zero by
Yeah.
2050, yes, that's a reasonable amount, because it takes a lot of time and gradual changes to change countries to try and reduce that carbon
I'm not
footprint.
gonna lie.
And
I was so surprised when India said they're gonna go net zero by 2070. I was like, there is no
yeah,
way. I could not believe it. I was like, this is not going to happen. I hope it
it
does
yeah
though.
yeah it takes governmental change, and
Yes.
that's really hard because a lot of politicians are corrupt and they work in self-interest and they're greedy and they work for money. It's that's just true. If we
Yeah.
look at like Coca-Cola, right,
Yeah.
they're saying like, oh, we reuse this and this is more eco-friendly. That's just like
It's a
that's
marketing
camouflage.
ploy, right?
It's a
Yeah.
market, yeah, for us to feel better about consuming their
Yeah.
products, when in reality they're not doing that. They're just trying to appeal to that so they don't get
I
attacked
mean, they
for
do it in such a small quantity that it
it.
it doesn't really make that much of a difference
Yeah,
overall. And I
yeah,
wish because companies won't really do a whole lot to what the public says until they're required to, right?
yeah,
The only, I guess, entity that can require them to do something is the government. And I feel like if
yeah,
governments can step up to include regulation that, you know, it's not even just protecting us, it's protecting the world. You're
yeah,
protecting yourselves, you're protecting others, you're protecting everybody. You're
yeah,
preventing something horrible from happening. But I mean,
yeah.
I just don't understand.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of that has like, especially world governments. If we take a look at the U.S., for example, we we put so much time, effort, money, like 750 plus $1 billion into our military every single year, and
Hmm.
like, okay, I know our like the amount of money that we put into our military is more than the next like 7, 8 countries combined, and those countries are our allies. So
Hmm.
what leaves me like, I can't I can't really say that my this is just an opinion, but like I don't understand why.
I think
Because like
everything
what are
we're
we
talking.
fighting
I
for?
think I think that's the point of our podcast. I mean, these are all
Yeah,
opinions.
yeah.
So go ahead.
I know. Okay, but like I just don't really see the 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 reason why we should be doing this, because personally I think that world government should be working in the interest of the human race and our
Exactly.
world because
Exactly.
they're so nearsighted
They're so
and
focused
power
on what's
hungry.
happening tomorrow that they're not
Hmm.
even focused on what's tomorrow. They're focusing on what's today. I don't understand
Yeah,
why they focus
yeah,
on today when they have a whole future ahead of them. It's not like
yeah,
they know that they're doomed in 30 years, so they're trying to spend all their money. I mean, no, they know that their people are going to last, but I don't feel like they care enough for their people because
yeah.
I mean, obviously, we haven't seen any real big form of push by any government. I mean, of course, we've had the summits and everything, but at least in the United States, we haven't seen a real big push um, for change. And I mean, we've had the recent infrastructure bill that had some form of that had a little bit of climate in it, but it was most of it was scrapped in the end. I mean, it was only
Yeah.
there to kind of
Hmm.
appeal to their target audience to support it, when in fact they knew it was going to be scrapped from the start because a bill that large is not going to be passed, right?
Yeah.
Only the essential components are going to be passed, and so it's more of a kind of it's more of a publicity kind of thing, which I feel is so aggravating for me because I guess we as a younger generation really want to see these changes happening early so that we have a future ahead of us. I
Hmm.
don't know if I really have a future ahead of me. You know?
Yeah. And I think that a lot of the older generation, at least, like the people who are mostly in charge, they don't see it like we do. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the importance of having podcasts
Perspective.
like this
Yeah.
to give that young generation's
Mm-hmm.
perspective,
Mm-hmm.
even though it's been vocalized for years.
Mm-hmm.
It just shows that like they can die of old age, but we'll die of the climate. We'll
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
die of human activity. We'll die early
Yeah.
because of choices
Yeah.
that they have made and we have made.
Yeah.
And I don't think
They
it's
might die
good
of
for the
heart
longevity.
failure, but we're gonna die of failure of them. Their
Yeah,
failures
exactly.
are going to kill us. If they don't
Yeah.
act now, I mean, I don't know how long I'm going to live.
Hmm. And like there are so many solutions, possible
Yeah,
solutions
yeah,
given
yeah.
by
There's so
climate
many.
scientists, but I definitely understand that it's hard to,
Yeah,
execute them on large scale. But like I think that if the countries were to allocate their resources more effectively,
yeah.
not towards like, oh, bigger stick, more power, better country. No. I think that if we were to increase diplomacy, which is asking for a lot, definitely, because there's like, geopolitical
Mhm,
arguments and whatnot. But I think that if countries were to be working towards that, more sustainable energy,
mhm,
stuff like that, we could like, for example, we could explore nuclear energy. Yes,
mhm.
it poses serious threats if there's a failure. And
Yeah.
how do we like, how do
I
we?
don't. I feel like
It's like
nuclear energy is
questions.
controversial because I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
yes, it
definitely
does
controversial.
produce energy. However, I mean, it's very there's always that risk factor, and it's like, oh, like how safe really will we be in that circumstance, where it's going to be very difficult to gauge where we're going to be at. And so
But we,
I mean, like, because when we have nuclear energy, we're going to have to store that nuclear waste somewhere. What
yeah,
country
yeah,
wants to take it? I feel like that's very
yeah,
difficult to, because no country wants nuclear storage to be, or nuclear waste to be in
yeah.
their country. I mean,
I
that's a
know
hazard.
I know that right now, a lot of countries who are relying on nuclear power are actually storing their nuclear waste in like concrete and like steel, whatever, underground. But like they're
Hmm.
also doing it in the ocean, which I don't know the ethicality, the future impact that has. But I think that yes, definitely exploring nuclear energy has many questions. Like, can the safety, proliferation, waste disposal, and cost barriers
Yeah.
be overcome?
Hmm.
And like, will the like negatives outweigh the positives or will the positives outweigh the negatives? But I think it's also important to think about, would I be more worried about a failure or waste
Hmm.
disposal in nuclear energy and
Hmm.
radiation, or the collapse of ecosystems across the world, and I think
Hmm.
that's an argument that's a pill that's hard to swallow. And it hasn't we haven't really seen much with nuclear energy. We have seen a lot, but not to the extent that I like to see, because
Hmm.
I know a lot of uh, that nuclear question with like uranium and you know that
Hmm.
has been used in making weapons.
Hmm.
And I think that mindset is really hard to change.
Hmm. Yeah.
So yeah.
I feel like honestly, so are you for or against nuclear energy?
personally, I am for nuclear energy as a, wide, massive amount of energy is required to power countries because we can't just cut fossil fuels, right? Like fossil fuels are going to be used until they're pretty much gone.
Hmm.
And obviously the switch to um, renewable energy sources like water, wind, solar works well in countries like Finland, Germany, Switzerland, the Netherlands,
Hmm.
countries that have very relatively
Hmm.
low crime rate, relatively high human development index, relatively good job markets, and high education.
So I've
And
pulled it
I,
up, and like about the nuclear power by country and how much
mhm,
they like their share of their like total energy generated is by nuclear power. And so number
yeah,
one, we have France with 70.6%, which is
mhm,
very hefty. Then
yeah,
Slovakia, Ukraine, Hungary, Bulgaria. The United States is not actually quite out there. We provide 19.7%, according to Wikipedia, of course.
hmm
Um, which is, I mean, we're a big country. 789,919 gigawatts produced,
yeah,
gigawatt hours produced, which is the number one. However, that only makes up and constitutes 19.7% of our shared total electricity use. That's mainly that like share is through fossil fuels and things like that. It's very very little of that is like renewable energy.
yes. And I think that that step towards renewable energy is definitely a good one. But it takes so many resources, so much time and effort that it's really disappointing for me to like accept that
Hmm.
like governments don't necessarily see that as an like a priority. And like yes, some countries do, and sometimes they do, but overall they don't because they're stuck with like diplomacy issues and there's so many other pertinent problems that the countries need to address that I know realistically it's hard for a country to devote all its time to the environmental sustainability and climate crisis.
Hmm.
So like I understand their side on it
Hmm.
a little bit. So yeah.
It's actually interesting. There's a few countries that are like phasing out. Like Germany is phasing out in 2022 of nuclear power. In Japan, many reactors have stopped. Belgium has a 2025 phase out, and Taiwan has a phase out planned. And then
Yeah.
Switzerland has a gradual phase out plan, which is very interesting. Um, I mean, yes, and it is non-renewable. But really, how are we going to tackle the issue of climate change is really the question. And when nuclear energy comes up, it's more of a kind of like it's more of like a push off answer. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
there's definite answers in front of us, but then there's nuclear power, which is a bit of a mystery to us.
Yeah.
And we have seen the effects of nuclear power, of failures of nuclear power. Like um, we've seen Fukushima, and we've seen like
Chernobyl.
yeah, we've seen
Yeah.
Chernobyl. We've seen the in Pennsylvania the I forgot the exact the island reactor.
Yeah. I know I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so it's some island. I forgot what it's called. I apologize. But we've seen the effects of failures. But really they have produced a considerable amount of energy. So how should we, I guess, move across that, because it's definitely very helpful, but it's also risky. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah, no, I think that also revving up renewable energy is a great idea. Like solar, wind, geothermal, bioenergy, hydro,
Hmm.
they all pose cost-effective,
Hmm.
alternatives
Yeah,
to fossil fuels
and
and
those are
include
definite, right?
even yeah, and those are definite. Even nuclear energy because they can be deployed relatively quickly and they also create jobs,
Hmm. Yeah.
We need engineers, we need people to run those and like evaluate, and
Hmm.
I think that that should be touched on a little bit more. But yeah,
There's been
also yeah.
I guess new um like emerging technologies about solar energy, and how about how there should be like more efficient, or at least I believe there should be more efficient um photovoltaic solar energy panels. And I get it's very difficult to make, but with nanotechnology and things like that, that can, and I mean the best thing at capturing sunlight of all time is, I mean, the thing that's in plants. It's our cellulose,
Hmm.
and it's our, whoa, cellulose. That's wrong. Um, chloroplast. Chloroplasts are the, like, most, like, they're the best things at capturing sunlight, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yes.
if we can, I guess, harness the idea of chloroplasts and how they capture energy from the sun, using their thyroids and their membranes, and we
Yes.
can try to, if we can, like, replicate that in a general way to make our photovoltaics more efficient, because our efficiency is not that high, yet we're still producing
Yeah.
a considerable amount of energy. If we can get that
Hmm.
that efficiency higher, just a little bit higher, we can churn out so much more energy, because I mean there's land, like, even we can put solar energy pretty much anywhere where there's space that doesn't really require land, like
Yeah.
mountains. Yes, it's cold and things like that, but mountains that are in, like, the less, like, more, like, cold areas, those can easily be, because I mean there's spaces in which can be, like, quarantined off and
Yeah.
things like
Yeah.
that. There's tons of open space that can be used for like holding solar panels, like our roofs. Our roofs
Yeah.
can hold at least one solar panel. I mean, I've seen houses with solar panels. I've seen homes with solar panels on their roofs, and I mean, it's a considerable and it's a good idea. Just
Yes.
trying to get. And it's also kind of cheaper. I mean, in the sunlight, I know, in our area, there's our local electrical company, asked if you'd like to buy a solar panel. And during the summer, of course, you get a lot of energy, while in, like, the wintertime, you don't get a whole lot, you know?
Yeah.
So, but if we have, solar energy across the world, we are going to get and if we're able to, this is a far-fetched idea, if we're able to connect everybody together and share the electricity, which is impossible because we're countries,
Hmm.
we're selfish and we're greedy, like, if we share this electricity, this combined electricity, that's enough to power the world, really. If we have a constant supply of energy, where it's summer on one side of the world and winter on the other side, I mean,
Yeah.
it's definitely easy. I mean, when it's hot on one side, when it's daytime on one side, and it's nighttime on the other, daytime turns on, nighttime turns off, and then they switch. It's definitely,
Yeah.
it's just a lot better in our environment.
Yeah. And I think that like just okay, solar power powers about 2% of the world. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's also far more expensive than coal.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the people just need to see the ramifications of what they
Yeah.
are going to face or what they're
Yeah.
causing. The extinction of thousands of animals,
Mm-hmm.
the deaths of hundreds of thousands of millions of people. And it's just it's hard because like human nature doesn't, especially like our current society,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't necessarily care about saving the
Yeah.
environment because what they seek out is money,
Mm-hmm.
water,
Yeah.
oh, not money, food,
Yeah.
water, and like relationships. And
I mean,
the thing to
money's
get
also,
all
I
that
guess.
is
Yeah.
money.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing to get all that is money,
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
large
Yeah.
money, right?
Yeah.
And so the thing that drives people mostly
Mm-hmm.
is money.
Mm-hmm.
And like companies obviously aren't gonna like trying to push solar panels unless you're a
Mm-hmm.
solar panel, like,
Yeah.
you know,
But I feel
it's
what I consider
hard.
it is an investment. Um,
Mhm.
it's an investment for the future that can work if enough people cooperate, right? This
Mhm.
is in in those circumstances, in this circumstance especially, is something that requires herd, um, kind of cooperation, And so
Mhm.
if it's not a lot of cooperation between people, then it won't work out. But if everybody bands together and chips in, it's definitely possible. And I mean, I remember, like, Elon Musk has. Have you heard about his gigafactories?
Yes.
And so he
Yes,
even
I have.
said 100 gigafactories can power the world, right? 100
Mhm.
gigafactories, right? That
Mhm.
it takes an investment, right? It's definitely expensive, but then again, what value is there of money when there's nothing to spend it on and there's no value of money left in the future, right? What the
Yeah.
value of it is now, I'd rather invest the value of the value of what I guess, if my dollar, right? My dollar, if
Yeah.
I spend that and I invest that for the future, my dollar would have gained more value by investing in that thing, to benefit others,
Mhm.
than holding that and my value of my dollar depreciating, because it will depreciate because we're not doing anything to protect our environment, and our environment
Yeah.
is the only thing that holds us humans together, right?
And it
It's it,
really all goes back, I'm sorry, it really
no,
all
go.
goes back to like human nature
Yeah.
because like what you said
Hmm.
and our decision making, like diet and exercise, for example. Emotions really override reasoning. And
Hmm.
while it can be easy to sit here as, or like people to all agree that the environmental crisis or an increase in how much is going to be catastrophic, and to reason that out, that's just not how the reality is because
Hmm.
emotions override reasoning.
Hmm.
And like, and especially when it comes to like natural gas, not natural gas, but like renewable resources
Hmm.
and energy supplies, like we were talking about now, powerful companies like the coal industry and the oil industry, they're obviously not going to want that because like an
Hmm.
ultra stable company or industry like coal or gas,
Hmm.
there's money to be made and
Yeah.
money to be lost.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that with them trying to push that narrative of like we need to
Hmm.
save the environment and we need to um, invest in like what you
Hmm.
were talking about, invest in more renewable resources, that's going to be the downfall of their company.
I
And
agree.
people don't want that. People are greedy. They do
Hmm.
not want that.
Yeah. Hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, we've covered a lot of topics. I feel like this was
Hmm.
good. Um, we've covered, I guess,
Yeah.
the main ideas, and we've, I guess, brought our own thoughts into it, which is good.
Yeah.
Because the
Yeah.
perspectives of others can enlighten your own. So, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, with that said, our discussion comes to an end. We thank you for listening and hope you'll stay tuned for future episodes. Don't forget to follow the Pepper Podcast on Instagram, Spotify, and YouTube.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
watching.
Thank you.